Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Deep Dive. You guys send us some seriously fascinating stuff, and we go through it all for you. We break it down, This time you send us a podcast episode called Heart Matters, and, it's all about relationships, building them, maintaining them, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, and the host, Alex, they really go beyond the usual, the typical relationship advice.
Yeah, for sure. Like, right off the bat, they start talking about trust, but not just like, did they cheat? Kind of trust.
Right, it's deeper than that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, trust is the foundation of any strong relationship.
And they emphasize that it doesn't have to be like these grand gestures. It's more about the little things.
Oh, absolutely. Like, even just keeping a small promise, right? It shows you're reliable.
Exactly. It shows consistency.
Yeah.
And it makes you think, like, how are my actions perceived by the people around me? Am I someone people can count on?
It's funny because I've always struggled with that whole building trust thing. It just feels so vague. But what Alex said about those small, consistent actions really resonated with me.
And they don't just talk about romantic relationships either. They touch on friendships, family relationships, even professional settings.
It's true. And then Alex goes on to talk about communication, and they have this analogy about speaking different languages, which I thought was super interesting.
Because even when you think you're being clear, sometimes your message just totally misses the mark.
It's like you're speaking English and they're speaking Klingon.
Right. And that's where listening comes in. Like really actively listening, not just waiting for your turn to speak, but actually trying to understand the other person's point of view. Even when you disagree with them.
Yes, yeah, I'm so guilty of that. Especially when things get a little heated. I just want to jump in with my 2 cents. But Alex had this great tip about using I statements instead of you statements.
Oh, tell me about it. I feel like I'm always doing that too, getting all defensive and...
Yeah, exactly. Like instead of saying, you never listen to me, you could say, I feel unheard.
Right. And it really can make a difference. It kind of shifts the tone of the conversation. It's less accusatory.
It's like taking the blame out of it. Have you ever tried that technique?
I have, yeah. I mean, it's not always easy because you got to really be mindful of your word choice, but I think it can help prevent those, like, blow-up arguments.
Right, like it just automatically makes things less confrontational.
Exactly. Because when someone feels attacked, they're more likely to get defensive, and then the whole conversation goes off the rails.
Totally. So even with great communication skills, conflict is bound to happen.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, no relationship is perfect.
Right. And in the episode, Alex talks about approaching conflict as a team, which I thought was a really cool concept.
Yeah, that was a good one. Like, instead of seeing it as me versus you, you're both on the same side trying to solve a problem together.
Exactly. And sometimes that means knowing when to take a break if things get too heated. I used to think taking a break was like giving up, but now I realize like sometimes you just got to walk away and come back to it later with a clear head.
Oh, 100%. Because in the heat of the moment, it's hard to think straight. You just end up saying things you don't really mean.
Right. And sometimes you just need a minute to like process your own emotions before you can even try to understand the other person's perspective.
Totally. And speaking of keeping things positive, Alex also gave some great tips on like keeping the spark alive in a relationship.
Oh, yeah. That whole never stop dating your partner thing. I love that.
It's so true, though. It's easy to fall into a routine, especially in a long-term relationship.
Like you get comfortable and just kind of stop putting in the effort. But really, even small gestures can make a big difference.
Absolutely. Like surprising your partner with their favorite takeout after a long day or something. Little things like that go a long way.
Totally, because it's not about grand gestures. It's about that consistent effort to show you care.
Right, and to keep things fun and exciting, Like you were saying, never stop dating.
Exactly. And Alex had some other examples too, like planning surprise date nights, or leaving little love notes, or just taking the time to really listen to each other's day.
I like that. It's about being intentional, about connecting with each other.
Right, and remembering that relationships evolve over time. What worked in the beginning might not work 5 or 10 years down the line.
Yeah, for sure. It's all about adapting and growing together.
Okay, now, the episode also had this listener question segment, and one question really stuck with me. It was, how do you know when it's time to walk away from a relationship?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Yeah, right. Like, when do you throw in the towel?
Well, as Alex said, there's no easy answer. Every relationship is different, but they did mention some red flags to watch out for.
Yeah, like persistent unhappiness, feeling like your needs aren't being met, a lack of respect or trust. Sometimes, people just grow apart.
And I think it's important to remember that sometimes ending a relationship, even though it's painful, is the healthiest thing to do.
For both people, yeah.
Like staying in a relationship that's not working can be more damaging in the long run.
For sure. So, okay, wow. We've covered a lot of ground here. Trust, communication, conflict, keeping the spark alive, and even, when to call it quits.
A lot to unpack, yeah.
So much. Before we move on to the next part of our deep dive, what resonated most with you from this first part? Think about it. Were there any aha moments for you?
And how do these insights connect with your own experiences?
Hold on to those thoughts. We'll be back in a jiffy with more from Heart Matters.
Welcome back, everyone. We've been diving deep into Heart Matters, and I'm curious, what's been swirling around in your mind since we last spoke? Was there anything in particular that struck a chord with you?
For me, I keep coming back to those I statements, like, saying I feel unheard instead of you never listen. It's such a simple shift, but it's powerful.
It really is.
Yeah.
And I think it goes beyond just the words themselves, right? It's
Yeah.
about the intention behind them.
Yeah, totally. Like, are you genuinely trying to express your feelings or just kind of disguising blame?
Exactly. It's got to be authentic,
Authenticity. Yeah, that's key. And speaking of, understanding where the other person is coming from, remember those active listening techniques we talked about?
Oh, absolutely. Like reflecting feelings, summarizing what you've heard.
Those are game changers. I've been trying to be more mindful of how I listen, and it's kind of crazy how much I was missing before.
It's so easy to get caught up in our own heads, like planning our response instead of really hearing what the other person is saying.
It's true, but when you really listen, it shows the other person you value them and their perspective. And that kind of brings us back to that whole never stop dating your partner thing.
Yes. Keeping that spark alive, right?
Exactly. It's so easy to slip into routine and let those special moments fade away.
It's like we forget how to speak the language of love once we feel secure.
Totally. Like, remember those early days of a relationship when everything was new and exciting? You put so much effort into making the other person feel special.
And it's not that that feeling has to disappear completely. It's just about finding ways to keep it alive, even when life gets busy.
I love those examples from the podcast, like surprise date nights or leaving little love notes. It's the little things that make a big difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be anything extravagant, just a little something to show you care.
It's about making that conscious effort to connect, and also realizing that relationships evolve over time.
It's true. What worked at the beginning might not work years down the line.
It's all about adapting and growing together. And, we talked about the good stuff, but we also touched on those red flags, the things that might signal it's time to walk away.
Yeah, that was a heavy but important part of the conversation.
It is. I mean, it's tough to admit when a relationship just isn't working, even when you've put in the effort.
It is. But sometimes ending a relationship, even though it's painful, is the best thing for both people.
It's like choosing to rip off a Band-Aid instead of letting it slowly peel off,
And remember, it's okay to reach out for support during those tough times.
Yeah, talking to friends, family, a therapist. It can make a world of difference.
It's so important to share those struggles and not go through it alone. So, as we reflect on all these insights from Heart Matters, what's really resonating with you?
For me, it's that whole idea that relationships are constantly evolving, They require effort, communication, and a willingness to adapt.
And that applies to all kinds of relationships, not just romantic ones.
So true. Our connections with partners, friends, family, they all contribute to making us feel alive and connected. But before we wrap up this episode, I want to leave you with one final thought.
We've talked about building relationships, nurturing them, ending them when necessary. But what about the aftermath? How do we deal with heartbreak and loss?
Okay, so that question has really been sticking with me, that whole how do you deal with heartbreak thing.
Yeah, it's a big one. And it's something we don't always talk about openly enough.
I think we're kind of taught to just, brush it under the rug and move on.
Right, like it's not okay to feel those feelings.
Exactly. But the truth is, heartbreak hurts. Even when a relationship ends on good terms, there's still a sense of loss.
It is a loss. It's the loss of a connection, a shared history, and maybe even a future you thought you had.
It's like grieving, grieving for the relationship.
It is grieving. And it's important to let yourself feel those feelings. Don't try to bottle them up or pretend they're not there.
So, okay, how do you even start to process all that? Where do you even begin?
Well, first and foremost, give yourself time and space. Don't rush the healing process.
But sometimes it feels like those emotions are just going to consume me, you know?
That's when it's so important to lean on your support system.
Oh, for sure. Talk to your friends, family, maybe a therapist. Don't go through it alone.
It's funny, we talk about communication in relationships, but that same principle applies to healing.
Yeah.
Being open and honest about what you're going through is so important.
And, it's important to remember that healing isn't linear. It's messy, it's up and down, it takes time.
Exactly. There's no set timeline for this stuff. Be patient with yourself.
It's so easy to compare yourself to others, like, oh, they're over it already, what's wrong with me?
Right, but everyone grieves differently. And some days are going to be harder than others.
That's when self-care is so important, taking care of yourself both physically and emotionally.
Absolutely. Indulge in things that bring you joy. Spend time in nature. Eat well. Get enough sleep.
Those are all part of the healing process too, you know? And it's funny because those same things we talked about for building healthy relationships, they apply to heartbreak too. The self-care, the communication, the support.
It's all connected. It's about taking care of yourself and letting yourself heal. And remember, even in the midst of loss, there's an opportunity for growth.
Yeah, for sure. It's a chance to reflect on what you learned from the relationship, what you want in the future.
To come out stronger and wiser on the other side.
So we've covered a lot in this deep dive into Heart Matters. And I think the big takeaway for me is that relationships are a journey.
They're full of ups and downs, joys and sorrows.
And through it all, we learn and we grow. And we discover more about ourselves and what we truly want in our lives.
That's beautiful. And just remember, you're not alone on this journey. There's support out there, whether it's from loved ones or professionals. Don't be afraid to reach out.
That's it for this deep dive, everyone. We hope you found some helpful insights here today.
And that you feel a little bit more equipped to navigate the complex world of relationships.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.